Welcome to this Farming for a Better Climate podcast.
You need to be looking at these potential things, looking at your farm, managing the risks and the potential negatives, but also from a business development and business plan point of view, looking at potential options and revenue streams and markets in the future that you may be able to get into, especially if some of your existing practices and that have to change. There's potentially new options and alternatives you can go into instead.
My name is Séamus Murphy. In today's podcast, we're looking at adaptation and how farming in Scotland will adapt to the changing climate and the things that we can do right now to build that resilience to our business. I'll speak to Anna Beswick of Adaptation Scotland and Iain Boyd, an environment consultant with SAC Consulting. It's a really interesting listen, and make sure you visit the Farming for a Better Climate website for more information on how you can adapt to a changing climate while continuing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on farms. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the podcast.
My name is Iain Boyd and I'm an environmental consultant in the environment team of SAC Consulting. We do quite a lot of work with farmers and landowners on all sorts of environmental issues, including climate change. And recently we've produced a guidance document for farmers on how they can adapt to climate change.
My name's Anna Beswick. I work for a sustainability organisation called Sniffer, and as part of my role as Sniffer, I manage the Scottish Government-funded Adaptation Scotland programme. And our role is to work with organisations, businesses and communities across Scotland to help people understand how Scotland's climate is changing, and then to actually work together to think about what the implications of that are for communities, for businesses, for different organisations, and then think about actually what can we do to adapt? What are the actions that we need to take right now? What are the actions that we might need to take in future?
Both of you are well suited then to talk about climate change and the impacts that climate change is going to have on Scotland. What changes are we going to see in the next 10, 20, 50 years in Scotland due to climate change?
So in Scotland, if we're talking about in an agricultural sense, with this changing climate, we're seeing the prevalence of more extreme events. So you're getting warmer, wetter winters, you're getting longer, drier summers, you're seeing changes in kind of growing patterns for certain types of crops, you're seeing more intense events like prolonged dry spells, and that has various kind of implications in terms of drought and wildfire risk. You're also seeing quite heavy kind of rainfall changes, rainfall patterns, which is leading to increased runoff, higher flood risk. And this is kind of, a lot of people kind of see climate change as this kind of far off distant issue, whereas it's already kind of starting to impact us. A lot of stuff that farmers are doing already on the farm, which they're maybe doing is just, they probably don't see it as a response to climate change or climate change adaptation. It's just kind of part of their day-to-day running of their farm business. A lot of the stuff they're kind of already doing is kind of partly a response to climate change. There's lots of talk at the moment about net zero and various climate change ambitions and targets, especially in Scotland. And there's a lot of talk about agricultural emissions and trying to reduce emissions and things from agriculture. But agriculture is also a sector where it can be very vulnerable to the effects and impacts of climate change. And if the farming sector as a whole is not prepared and ready, it could be a really bad impact on farming and our food supply going forward.
And you mentioned like things like flooding and drought and the increased prevalence of that into the future. Farmers and agriculture is at the coalface of that. That's going to have impacts in other areas of society as well. Anna, have you where do you stand in that? What's the future look like in Scotland when it comes to climate change?
Yeah, so I think Ian's absolutely right in that we're already seeing very significant changes in Scotland's climate. So we know, for example, that temperatures are around 1 degree warmer now than they were back in the 1960s. And anyone involved in agriculture will know far better than me around the impact that that has on growing seasons and productivity. But then contrasted with this kind of long-term average increase in temperature, we have this just more volatile weather and climate systems where we have more extremes, as Iain described, very significant changes in rainfall. So like Scotland, we now have maybe 20% more rainfall in winter than we did, say, like 40, 50 years ago. And conversely, we have over the long term got a lot more drier weather over the summer. Mm-hmm. But that's all complicated by the fact that whilst over the long-term average over many years, our summers might be getting drier, actually we're getting more intense, heavy rainfall events during summer. So when it does rain, we're getting a lot more of these very intense kind of summer storm events. So yeah, we're dealing with a much more volatile climate, the long-term trends that we've been seeing for many decades now are continuing and are set to intensify and increase in the years ahead. So our efforts to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions are going to be really important in limiting the amount of climate change that we have to deal with. But we can't turn off the taps immediately. Even if we shut down all of our carbon emissions today, we're still dealing with the legacy of the emissions that we put into the atmosphere over the past decade. So the farming community very much on the front line of experiencing those impacts in the way that just you see the sort of history and the heritage of the farming community. They know about the landscapes, the crops, just the effects that it has on people living in different communities that are exposed to different risks, be that like increases in the risk of wildfire or flooding, introduction of new pests and diseases.
I've had experience of farmers. It's all anecdotal evidence, obviously, but saying that they've experienced those more extreme rainfall events that you mentioned, and it's becoming more common in the last few years, and it's putting crops at risk and putting their ability to get into fields when they need to get into fields at risk. And it's all these things that are going to change the way that farming can be done in Scotland into the future. So with that in mind, then, have many farmers contacted Adaptation Scotland to kind of raise these worries or seek advice?
So through Adaptation Scotland, it's really important for us that we work in collaboration and partnership. So we very much see ourselves as working alongside lots of different organisations to support efforts to adapt to climate change. So that's where it's been really good to have this collaboration with SRUC and the Farming for a Better Climate programme that has that real expertise in climate change and agriculture, and really great to see the new guidance that's come forward on that climate change adaptation and agriculture from SRUC. So I think whilst we have contact with the farming community, with NFU Scotland from time to time, we know that actually a lot of the insights that farmers are looking for around climate change are available through the Farming for a Better Climate programme and the type of guidance that's recently been produced on that. So that's at a kind of national level, but through the Adaptation Scotland programme, we have a range of initiatives where we're working at kind of a national level on this topic area, but also in cities, regions, islands, and within different localities, so towns or villages, for example. Yeah. And at that scale, we see that that's really a space where landowners, farmers are absolutely crucial folk involved in the discussions of actually climate change will impact Glasgow differently to the way it will impact Mar in Aberdeenshire or the Outer Hebrides. And that's where we really value the input that the relationships and the partnerships that are in place at those scales to to really hear what's really happening. I was interested to hear what you said, that actually you've heard anecdotally from farmers about how they're having to deal with these increased summer storm events. And for us, it's really important that the science that we might get through the Met Office, which is really robust, we have a lot of confidence in, we can look at the trends in the data. Actually, we really want to hear people's stories of actually how this is working out in different places.
The interesting thing about those stories that I've heard have been that it's the local element to it. So people in certain areas have had extreme rainfall events during the summer. So again, you have that worry about erosion and things like that, because a prolonged dry period followed by an extreme rainfall event can cause so many different issues. But then they'll speak to their neighbour or their farmer maybe 10 minutes away, and they are still waiting for the rain. So it's these kind of things that I think are becoming more and more worrying for farmers, and is only going to become more important to kind of adapt to that and to expect it and be ready for it when they do hit. So you mentioned the document that has been produced recently. Iain, do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think what you've just mentioned there is it's really important that the range of impacts that are going to be, I mean, there's a lot of potential impacts, whether it's your pests and diseases, it's changes to soil quality, it's pressure on water resources. There's a lot of impacts out there, and that's only going to intensify over the next few decades. And in terms of adapting to it, as Anna said, that there's a difference across the country from what's going to impact one part won't impact another part. So every farm is unique. And in terms of adaptation, it's really good to pick what's best for your farm and your business, and the specific challenges that you're going to face going forward. The climate change adaptation for agriculture guide and checklist we produced is basically to see is your farm ready. It was funded by the University Innovation Fund from the Scottish Funding Council. And if you want to look at it and download it or request a copy, it's all available on the Farming for a Better Climate website. And in there, it looks at the most suitable and effective measures to improve resilience on your farm. And it can also be used to kind of future-proof and kind of plan for like an emergency action plan going forward. We separated into kind of 4 distinct areas, looking at flooding and heavy rain, drought and high temperatures, storminess and extreme events, and snow and cold weather. Now, it's maybe a bit, why is snow and cold weather in there if we're talking about climate change? Well, snow and cold and all these things are still going to impact in the future, especially in some areas of the country. So it's important to not forget about that and to be ready and to still kind of factor that into your business. As well as that, we talked a bit about anecdotal evidence and kind of getting examples of what's happening elsewhere. There is case studies built into the document, which is doing exactly that. It's looking at what other farmers have done and how they're adapting to climate change. And a lot of it, to be honest, is just common business sense that most farmers will already be doing just as part of their daily management of their farm, and they won't necessarily automatically think of it as climate change adaptation. But the whole point of the checklist is for you to go through it and just maybe get some ideas, or look at your own business, go around it and see if there's any potential improvements you can make. The other flip side of it is, I mean, there's a lot of potential threats and risks from climate change. There's also actually potentially some benefits from agriculture in terms of a longer growing season, for example, or a different variety of crops and produce you could have on your farm. So there's also an aspect of being prepared and being ready that you are able to take advantage of any potential benefits that are going to emerge in the future.
Yeah, I imagine it's all about being kind of ready and resilient, so that you can maneuver your business in such a way that if one of these rainfall events or other things come and damage one crop, maybe you have some sort of built-in resilience there. Do you want to tell us a bit then, just going back to each of the four main areas that you covered in the document. So talking about flooding and heavy rain, drought and high temperatures, increased storminess, and snowfall and extreme cold. If a farmer is concerned about, say, maybe flooding and heavy rain on their farm, what are some of the things that a farmer could do now to help build that resilience?
So if you have flooding and heavy rain, you might be concerned with things like, increased runoff, soil compaction, all that sort of stuff. So in terms of soil compaction, you can use the free visual evaluation of soil structure, the VES guide, and take steps to improve your soil structure, reduce runoff, things like cover crops in your fields. There's a lot of quite simple, low-cost options there you could look at. There's other things like you can check and maintain and potentially improve drainage, both in the field and in your steading. You could look at a flood risk plan and make sure you've got mechanisms and ways, for example, if you do suffer from flooding, of potentially moving stock from one area to another area. You could look at sustainable drainage solutions, which would help to one, treat any runoff you have from your farm, but also slow it down, so you're kind of reducing the flood risk as well. Things like a farm slurry and manure management plan, for example, if you are having to house your stock for longer periods of time inside, is ensuring you've got enough capacity and storage and options in place for that. If you're suffering from droughts and high temperatures, in the checklist there, you have options like making sure you have a fire action plan to deal with your wildfire risk, or having suitable shade for animals, or even working with your neighbours and your local kind of community to form an abstraction group. So there's lots of ideas there for droughts and high temperature. Same for storminess, just making sure you have kind of a backup plan in place if you have any disruption to your supplies or business. Maintaining your buildings, making sure they're suitable. And same for snow. It's all about, if you suffer from snow and cold weather, it's making sure you have options to clear your access, making sure livestock have access to food and water in extreme conditions. So there's a whole range of stuff you can look at. And like we say, every farm is different, so not all of these will be applicable to your business, but it's a case of working through it, looking at what you've got on farm and finding the best solutions for you.
A lot of the things that these farmers can do on their land, that will have or could have a positive impact in these other areas where you said that it's going to be different for, say, Glasgow to these rural communities, but these kind of things that farmers do can help those downstream risks when it comes to the more urban communities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think Iain's obviously flagged some quite specific measures that farmers could take in terms of their own land and their practices, and some short and long-term measures they could take. But I think farmers have a really important leadership role as part of the wider community. In the context of a river catchment, that does include kind of how the way in which land is managed and used on their farm affects the wider river catchment. And there's some really great examples of where landowners and farmers are really involved in the detailed discussions around how whole river catchments can be managed for the benefit of everybody, so that perhaps measures that are implemented on farmland actually help to slow the flow of water down catchment and reduce flood risk to, towns further down catchment. But I think also a lot of the solutions that we talk about in terms of things that we can do to increase resilience and adapt to climate change, actually farmers know about. They might not call it climate change adaptation. I reckon folk would often call it just common sense, or stuff we just started to do because we needed to. And I think we can't underestimate the sort of real richness of local knowledge and insights and that farmers have, and also the relationships between farmers in different in different communities will all know each other, the shared issues and challenges, and actually there's a huge potential for farmers to really be talking about this topic more, and not just kind of having to respond every time there's a severe weather event, just another like crisis ensues, but actually saying, do you know what, this trend that we're seeing is here to stay. What do we as a community think needs to happen? Are there some kind of strategic or things we can do together that will make all of us more resilient? I know like the farmer-led groups are having some really important conversations around climate change mitigation and what the role of farming is in terms of the emission reduction piece, and that's important. Absolutely. I think that it would be really valuable to hear more from the farming community about how they think this huge systemic challenge of adapting to these massive scale changes can be dealt with, both within the individual farms, like Iain shared, but also like in terms of landscapes and places and communities.
The great thing about some of these things are the things that farmers can do to adapt, for the most part, will also go towards that mitigation as well. A lot of these kind of, we'll say tree planting for natural flood management, or to provide shelter for livestock in these high when we have summers with higher temperatures and things like that. They'll tick both boxes. They'll tick the adaptation box and they'll tick that mitigation box, which I think is really a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, definitely.
The one thing you mentioned, Iain, there was some of the kind of opportunities that may arise. Will they be real positives, or will they just be kind of forced changes to farming practices that may open up new markets, we'll say?
Yeah, a lot of the talk is about the threats, which is rightly so, because it's a risk to everyone. Climate change is the biggest threat and risk to the planet. So it's right that is the kind of focus of the mitigation and the adaptation, is to try and reduce those risks. But yeah, there are these opportunities that can arise from it. And for agriculture, I mean, the main benefits you're going to see are from things like your longer growing season, a greater variety and yield of some types of crops. There's novel crops and new types of crops which previously weren't able to grow in Scotland. You may be able to start to grow here in the future. There could be an increase in the amount of arable land and more grassland production in some parts of Scotland, and like a general overall increase in agricultural production, which all sound great, but you need to be looking at these potential things, looking at your farm, managing the risks and the potential negatives, but also from a business development and business plan point of view, looking at potential options and revenue streams and markets in the future that you may be able to get into, especially if some of your existing practices and that have to change. There's potentially new options and alternatives you can go into instead.
Yeah. The reason that these things are difficult, it's difficult to kind of forecast what things are going to look like in 10, 20 years time. But we do know that that temperatures are rising and are set to rise unless we make drastic changes to the way we live our lives. What path are we on right now? What does the future look like if we continue the trajectory that we're on right now?
So that's a really good question. And I think I would start my answer to that by saying that there is just a huge moment, a huge opportunity coming for us to determine that globally. And the COP26 conference, which is scheduled for this winter in Glasgow, is a real moment where countries will be able to make those commitments to enhance their emission reduction commitments and limit the extent of future change. Right now, we are still on a medium high trajectory in terms of our emissions, and we're heading towards a high emissions future. And if we remain on that pathway, we will experience changes in climate that are far beyond anything that's been experienced in human history, at a rate and a pace which is beyond anything we can imagine. So if we imagine we've seen 1 degree of global warming over the last, say, 50, 60 years in Scotland, that pales into, and the impacts that that's already having on us pale into insignificance compared to the impacts that will occur if we head towards 4, 5, 6 degrees of warming at the end of this century. So it's all to play for. There are things we can do to limit the extent of future climate change, to keep future temperature increases below 2 degrees, closer to 1.5 degrees. We're already going to have to face massive changes as a result of even that kind of increase in temperature. But right now, we're not achieving the emission reduction goals that we need to keep to that standard. So whilst you're quite right, I think you were saying earlier about it's uncertain as to how climate will change. I'd say that there are certainties in that we know the direction of travel. It's getting warmer. For globally, it's getting warmer. In Scotland, we are having these warmer, wetter winters, hotter, drier summers with these heavy rainfall events in summer. We're having sea level rise and enhanced coastal erosion, which means soft, low-lying land at the coast in some areas will be lost at an increasing rate. So though that is happening, it's about the extent to which that will happen.
Yeah.
And that's where the uncertainty is, that we need to perhaps consider that when we're taking long-term decisions in particular. We need to consider actually the long-term future as part of investment and planning, and become more resilient so that we're actually able to thrive whatever the future climate holds as much as possible.
Yeah, so it's in everyone's interest. It's in if you're a farmer, and it's in your interest to be thinking about this stuff, long-term interest, just to start thinking, okay, we're in a climate crisis. What do I need to do? Maybe firstly to help mitigate, and then secondly to adapt to what will happen. And then if we take that approach, hopefully we'll be able to reduce some of the impacts.
Yeah, I think it needs all of our efforts. I think this is not a topic area that environmentalists can try to fix. Actually, if we're going to see the kind of changes that we need to transition towards a net zero future and a more resilient, climate ready future, it needs all of our intelligence and all of our insights and knowledge. And I think the farming community has such a rich source of knowledge and expertise and influence that it can bring to this topic if it chooses to do so. And we're already seeing lots of examples where a real difference is being made. And I would just really encourage folk listening to kind of consider how they can lend their voice and influence to this area to be part of the solution, for sure. Many farms are thinking about thinking about actually who's this land will be passed on to and what state will it be in the years ahead and the generations ahead. And now is a moment where we can really shape the resilience of future generations.
Yeah, Anna's right. The challenge is huge, and we need it's a global problem, and it really needs everyone's kind of effort and drive to improve it. You mentioned net zero. The target for net zero emissions is 2045, which is just over 20 years away. We've got the COP conference in Glasgow this year. Today is Earth Day, and there's a big climate leaders summit happening in the US, all with these kind of ambitions and really, really ambitious targets on how to kind of mitigate climate change. And it really needs a big drive and a big effort from everyone to kind of, if these are going to be reality, and if we are going to try and reduce the impacts on everyone.
It's interesting that we talk about that in this year, or in this past, say, 12 months, where the world has gone through a huge change in the way that we think about what we can do, what we can achieve as a global society. And I think it really puts it into perspective. And I've heard people say this before, that when we as a planet decide to do something, we can work together and get it done. And I think that's probably what's required. And I think we'd all agree that hopefully that we can have some sort of plan come out of COP26, and And wouldn't it be brilliant if that plan came out of Scotland?
The pandemic and the kind of that's illustrated that we can make these massive shifts. I think you're absolutely right in that. I think it's maybe brought two things to light. One is the emergence of risks, deep, like systemic risks that can change everything. And the pandemic is clearly the realization of a risk that was always there, but has emerged and just had such a profound impact that will last for, decades to come. And I think it's really opened up a lot of people up to the knowledge that actually climate change is an even bigger, deeper systemic risk, even than the pandemic, and that it's real and it's here and it's happening. And that if we're going to increase resilience, the best way for us to do that is to be proactive, is to not wait until crisis upon crisis happens, but it's actually to plan, to think about this, to do the hard work of disagreeing over topics and trying to come to consensus and take action. So I would just encourage folk to be prepared to enter into this space, because it needs everybody to bring solutions to the table on it.
The one other thing I just wanted to ask about was, sometimes when I'm speaking to farmers, that you can get quite a, not negative, but maybe skeptical backlash when it comes to climate change and some of the stuff that's being asked of them. As we've said here, probably at the coalface, probably going to see a lot of the impacts that climate change is going to have. It will be hitting farmers first, but they're also in a unique position to mitigate. As they are, as you said before, Anna, they are the land managers. They have the knowledge of the land. How do you think that we can get more farmers on site to start doing more mitigation and adaptation work?
It's about building trust, isn't it? It's about people feeling like they can be honest about what they think needs to happen, and also can come and say, actually, I don't know exactly how we're going to deal with this challenge. Here are my thoughts. What are your thoughts? And I think I would love to hear more of that, there to be space for more of those conversations, to break down those kind of silos and boundaries that exist between organizations and between people, and that maybe stop us working together and having these conversations and finding workable solutions, and to have a shift towards actually being able to work more collaboratively, being able to hear each other, being open to change, and being open to the fact that, there maybe I will have to make changes that I wouldn't have previously wanted to make on both sides, on lots of sides, not saying that would always have to be farmers. So I feel like I'm being quite vague about that answer, but I think it's like, there's kind of, you say, we need a task group on climate change adaptation, and we need to recruit X numbers of farmers into that, and then we'd solve the problem. And that there is space for mechanisms like that, and specific spaces to highlight there's a need for leadership, but I think there's also a need for genuine conversation about these topic areas, about actually climate change is real for everybody, irrespective of your background, your political beliefs. It's here. We're facing these challenges today, and we need that kind of these open and honest discussions about what it means for Scotland and what needs to happen to build a more resilient future.
Yeah, I think there's a real need for greater knowledge exchange. I think as a sector, we're not very good at getting the good stories out there enough. There's a lot of good things and good examples already being done across Scotland. And I think farming generally, we need to really work on getting those case studies, getting those examples, and getting bigger uptake of a lot of the good work that's already underway and taking place right across the country.
There is also the funding side of things, I suppose, as well, as to some of the work. Hopefully that will come in the future anyway. Both of you are working to try and prevent or slow down climate change, whilst also helping businesses and society as a whole to adapt to climate change. What are your hopes for the future? We'll say 2045 because that's our target for net zero. So what are your hopes for the future to up to net zero in 2045?
Yeah, I think, to me, this is a real opportunity to build things better, to build a greener society, more sustainable ways of functioning. Agriculture 2045 needs to be seen as a massive part of the solution to climate change, not just a cause of it, which is potentially where a lot of the media attention is at the moment. So by 2045, I'd like to see this really thriving, sustainable Scottish economy, which is green, and agriculture is playing a really healthy and important part in all sorts of stuff, in your food production, in your environmental standards, and in your tackling and adapting to climate change.
Yeah, I think we can also have a lot of hope. A lot of the things that we're talking about now, a lot of the commitments that have been made should take us towards a future that is net zero, where we are more resilient to the impacts of climate change. And actually lots of the things that we need to achieve those goals are just things that are better for health and well-being, for quality of life, and for the environment. So yeah, I hope that we'll be able to look back in 2045, which isn't that far away in many respects, and say that, we'll be amazed that we were actually able to make the kind of changes that we saw happen. I hope we're able to look back and say we went beyond what we could have even imagined back in 2021, when we were sort of living in a weird post-pandemic, or not post-pandemic even, pandemic recovery time. I'd also say through the Adaptation Scotland programme, we do have lots of partnership projects. We have an inquiry service. We're always really happy to hear from anyone that wants to get in touch with us to discuss climate change adaptation, anyone who's got a view or a question or experiences that they want to hear, they want to share with us, that they think we should know about in informing our work or requests. And folk can get in touch with us through the website, which is adaptationscotland.org.uk, which has a contact us form, or you can email us, contact us on social media, and we'd be really pleased to hear people's views and opinions on this topic area.
Okay, thanks very much for joining us, Iain and Anna.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. For more information on the topics covered, please visit the Farming for a Better Climate website, and you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.